please." Queen Elena Winterbourne placed a thick leather folder on her husband's desk. "Just read the first page." Alpha King Damien Ashford didn't look up. His eyes remained fixed on the military reports spread before him. "The peace summit begins at sunrise." "I know. I'm already behind schedule." "So am I." Elena's voice trembled. "But this can't wait." He sighed quietly. Not angrily, just tired. "We've discussed this." "No." She shook her head. "You've postponed discussing it." For the first time, Damien looked up. His expression softened. He reached for her hand. "I promise we'll go through everything tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word landed like a stone in her chest. For 3 weeks, tomorrow had become the answer to every warning she brought him. Tomorrow, he'd review the missing treasury records. Tomorrow, he'd investigate the disappearing weapons from the royal armory. Tomorrow, he'd question why 6 veteran guards had resigned within a single month. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. She gently pulled her hand away. There might not be a tomorrow. The crack in her voice finally caught his attention. He frowned. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Elena opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized ledgers, lists of military supplies, copies of coded messages, statements from frightened servants who had begged her not to reveal their names. She turned to the first page. "The Eastern Armory is missing over 400 silver blades." She turned another page. 3 military routes were copied without authorization. Another. "Royal funds have been transferred into accounts that don't exist." Then she placed one final document before him. At the bottom, a familiar signature. Lord Cedric Hawthorne. Damien's expression hardened. "No." Elena closed the folder. "I checked every figure myself. There has to be another explanation." "There isn't. Cedric raised me." "I know. He buried my parents." "I know. He taught me how to rule." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's why this hurts so much." Silence stretched between them. Outside the study windows, music drifted across the palace grounds. The kingdom celebrated the 10th Victory Festival. Inside, its future quietly hung in the balance. Damien leaned back in his chair. "I trust Cedric. You trust everyone else more than me." The words escaped before she could stop them. His face fell. "That's not fair, isn't it?" She looked around the room. Maps, military reports, diplomatic letters, documents from ministers he barely knew. He had spent hours reading every one of them. Yet the folder she had carried through sleepless nights remained unopened. She stepped closer to his desk. "I didn't come here as your Luna. I came as the person who uncovered evidence of treason." He rubbed his temples. "Elena, if you're wrong, if I'm wrong," she interrupted quietly, "I'll apologize to Lord Cedric before the entire royal council." "And if you're right?" He didn't answer. Because he couldn't imagine Cedric betraying him. She took a slow breath. "People are going to die if you don't read this." Another long silence. Finally, Damien pushed the folder gently back across the desk. "We'll talk tomorrow." Everything inside Elena became strangely still. She realized something in that moment. This wasn't about Cedric anymore. It wasn't even about the conspiracy. It was about her voice. Somewhere along the years, the man who once listened to every fear she whispered beneath the stars had stopped hearing her at all. She carefully picked up the folder, wiped away the tear rolling down her cheek before it could reach the pages. Then she whispered, "I hope tomorrow comes in time." Damien nodded absently. "It will." He lowered his eyes back to the reports on his desk. He never saw the look on Elena's face as she walked toward the door. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was acceptance. The quiet acceptance of someone who had finally understood that speaking louder could never make someone listen. The study door closed softly behind her. Damien didn't look up. He simply reached for another report. Certain. that tomorrow would give him all the time in the world. He had no way of knowing that it was the last time he would ever hear his Luna ask him to believe her. The palace celebrated until dawn. Music echoed through the grand halls. Nobles toasted another year of peace. Servants laughed as they cleared away empty wine glasses. No one noticed that the Luna never returned to the banquet. No one except her oldest maid. Martha knocked gently on Elena's chamber door. "Your Majesty?" No answer. She assumed the queen had finally fallen asleep after another exhausting week. Quietly, she walked away. Hours later, before the first rays of sunlight reached the palace towers, Elena stood alone at the northern gate. She carried no suitcase, no jewelry, no royal seal, only the worn leather folder tucked beneath one arm. The same folder Damien had refused to read. Captain Ellis, the elderly commander of the night watch, recognized her immediately. "Your Majesty?" She smiled gently. "I need one favor." He straightened. "Anything. I want to leave quietly." His eyes widened. "Should I prepare an escort?" "No." "A carriage?" She shook her head. "Horses draw attention. At least allow me to send guards. I've already spent years asking people to protect what mattered." She looked toward the distant mountains. "This journey is mine." The old captain hesitated. "Does His Majesty know?" A shadow crossed her face. "I tried to tell him." That answer was enough. Captain Ellis bowed deeply. "I never saw you leave." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "Thank you." Moments later, she disappeared into the mist beyond the palace walls. Alone. Damien awoke later than usual. The Peace Summit delegation was scheduled to depart within the hour. He reached across the bed automatically. The sheets beside him were cold. He smiled to himself. She must already be awake. Perhaps she was still upset. He planned to apologize after returning from the summit. He even rehearsed the words while dressing. "You were right. I should have listened." Simple. Honest. Enough to make her smile again. He walked into the breakfast room. Empty. "The queen hasn't come down yet?" he asked. The servants exchanged uncertain glances. "No, Your Majesty." He frowned. "Send someone to wake her." Martha hurried upstairs. A few minutes later, she returned, pale. "Your Majesty." "The queen isn't in her chambers." Damien stood. "What do you mean?" "We searched everywhere." He strode upstairs himself. Her room looked untouched. Her dresses still filled the wardrobe. Every jewel remained in its case. The Luna crown rested exactly where she always placed it after ceremonies. Even her favorite books remained stacked beside the window. Nothing suggested departure. Except, her travel cloak was gone. And so was the leather folder. Damien's heartbeat quickened. Search the palace. Servants scattered in every direction. The gardens, the library, the temple. The stables. Nothing. Captain Ellis was summoned. He knelt before the king. "Did you see the queen?" The old captain hesitated only briefly. "Yes." Damien stepped forward. "Where is she?" "I don't know." "You let her leave?" "She gave no destination. Why didn't you stop her?" Captain Ellis slowly met the king's eyes. "Because she didn't leave like someone running away. She left like someone who had already said goodbye." Those words struck harder than any accusation. Damien rushed back to Elena's chambers. There had to be something. A letter. A note. Anything. He searched every drawer, every bookshelf, every writing desk. Nothing. No farewell, no explanation, no plea to come after her. Only silence. He sank into the chair beside the window. For the first time since becoming king, the palace no longer felt like home. It felt empty. His gaze drifted toward the fireplace. There, resting against the mantel, stood the portrait from their wedding day. Elena was smiling at him, trusting him completely. He suddenly remembered her final words. "I hope tomorrow comes in time." A chill spread through him. Tomorrow had arrived. But Elena was gone, and the one thing she had carried away was the chance to tell him everything she had already tried to say. Outside, the royal trumpets sounded. The delegation to the peace summit was waiting. With a heavy heart, Damien mounted his horse. He promised himself one thing. The moment he returned, he would find his wife. He didn't yet know that before the summit ended, the evidence Elena had begged him to read would be written in blood. The peace summit began beneath banners of friendship. Kings from 12 neighboring realms gathered inside the grand hall. Generals shook hands. Ambassadors exchanged gifts. Musicians filled the air with hopeful melodies. For the first time in years, the continent seemed closer to lasting peace. Yet Damien couldn't focus. Every conversation reminded him of Elena. Every pause made him wonder where she had slept the night before. Had she found shelter? Had she eaten? Was she safe? Several times he reached for the empty chair beside him before remembering she wasn't there. The absence followed him everywhere. On the second afternoon of the summit, everything changed. A deafening explosion shattered the celebration. The eastern balcony collapsed. Screams echoed through the hall. Masked assassins burst through hidden passages with silver blades drawn. "Protect the rulers!" Royal guards rushed forward. Chaos swallowed the summit. Damien drew his sword and fought beside the allied kings. By the time the attack ended, 3 rulers lay dead. Dozens more were wounded. The assassins had known exactly where every royal delegation would be seated. Someone had leaked the confidential security plans. One surviving attacker was captured alive. Before dying from his wounds, he laughed weakly. "You trusted the wrong man." Then he handed a folded coded document to the nearest guard. "For your king." Hours later, Damien unfolded the blood-stained paper inside his private quarters. His breath caught. At the bottom of the coded payment ledger appeared a signature he had seen almost every day since childhood. Lord Cedric Hawthorne. No. His voice barely escaped. It can't be. The Chancellor entered moments later, carrying several sealed trunks recovered during simultaneous raids on Cedric's estate. The old stateswoman's face was ashen. "Your Majesty, we found everything." She opened the first trunk. Bundles of foreign gold. The second. Military maps marked with secret escape routes. The third. Years of correspondence with rival kingdoms. Each letter confirmed the same horrifying truth. Cedric had sold the kingdom piece by piece. Not for months. For years. Damien stared silently. Then the Chancellor placed one final folder upon the table. Its leather cover looked painfully familiar. The investigators found this inside Cedric's private safe. Damien's hands trembled. He recognized the worn corners immediately. Elena's folder, the one he had pushed back across his desk. Slowly, he opened it. The first page listed missing weapons, exactly as Elena had described. The second, detailed unauthorized treasury transfers. The third, identified every noble secretly working with Cedric. Each accusation was supported by dates, receipts, witness statements, and coded correspondence. Every page ended with the same careful signature, prepared by Queen Elena Winterborn. His vision blurred. She hadn't brought him suspicions. She had brought him proof. He remembered her standing beside his desk. "Please, just read the first page." He had refused. The room suddenly felt unbearably quiet. Damien returned to the palace 3 days later. He walked directly into his private study. Nothing had changed. The chair where Elena had stood remained exactly where she had left it. The ink bottle she had used to organize the evidence still rested beside the lamp. He sat behind his desk, opened the folder once more, and this time, he read every single page. Each word felt heavier than the last. Not because it exposed Cedric's betrayal, because it reminded him that Elena had spent weeks trying to save him, trying to save the kingdom. trying to save innocent lives. All she had needed was for him to listen. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Captain Ellis entered. "We've searched every neighboring territory." Damien looked up hopefully. No sign of Her Majesty. "The ports?" "We questioned every harbor master." "The mountain passes?" "Nothing." Damien slowly closed the folder. For the first time in his reign, the strongest man in the kingdom looked utterly defeated. He had uncovered the traitor, saved what remained of the alliance, protected the throne, yet none of it mattered, because the one person who had seen the danger before everyone else had vanished without leaving even a single trace. 3 months after leaving the Alpha Kingdom, Elena Winterborn buried her last reminder of the throne. Not her wedding ring. She had left that behind. Not her crown. She had abandoned it on its velvet cushion. She buried her name. The weathered wooden marker carried only 4 simple words: Queen Elena Winterborn. She stood quietly before it, then placed a single white lily at its base. The woman who kept begging to be heard doesn't live here anymore. When she turned away, Dr. Elena Rowan took her first step forward. The coastal city of Aramore had never cared about titles, only usefulness. Its streets overflowed with merchants, sailors, scholars, and refugees from kingdoms scarred by war. No one asked Elena where she had come from, only what she could do. She answered the only way she knew: by helping. She volunteered in a small charity clinic, treating dock workers injured unloading ships. The elderly physician who ran the clinic watched her reset broken bones with remarkable precision. "You've done this before." "A little," he laughed. "That's the greatest understatement I've heard all year." Within weeks, patients began requesting the quiet young doctor by name. She listened longer than anyone else. She remembered every face, every family, every promise she made. One afternoon, 2 neighboring merchants nearly started a knife fight over a disputed shipment. Instead of calling the city guards, the mayor called Elena. She spent 2 hours reading contracts, interviewing witnesses, reviewing shipping records, then calmly uncovered the clerk who had altered the documents for personal profit. The merchants shook hands. The clerk confessed. The mayor blinked in amazement. "You're a physician." Elena smiled. Sometimes the illness isn't in the body. Word spread quickly. Soon, village elders sought her advice before disputes became feuds. Military commanders quietly asked her to review supply routes. Young rulers invited her to lecture their advisors on preventing corruption. Everywhere she went, she taught the same lesson. Most disasters don't begin with evil. They begin when honest people decide to investigate tomorrow instead of today. No one realized those words had been born from her own heartbreak. Years passed. The clinic became a hospital. The hospital became an academy. Students arrived from distant kingdoms, eager to study under the brilliant Dr. Elena Rowan. One evening, the academy's founder approached her with an official letter. "The Continental Alliance wishes to appoint you as its senior strategic advisor." Elena looked surprised. "There are people far more experienced." "There are." He smiled warmly, but none more trusted. She hesitated. "I've spent years avoiding royal courts. You won't be serving a throne." He handed her the sealed invitation. "You'll be serving peace." She accepted. Not because she wished to stand beside kings again, but because if her knowledge could prevent even one family from suffering what hers had, it was worth returning. Across the sea, stories about the mysterious Dr. Elena Rowan spread from kingdom to kingdom. Some called her the physician who healed nations. Others called her the woman who could uncover corruption before it destroyed governments. Children knew her simply as the teacher who believed every question deserved an answer. No one connected her to the vanished Luna of the Alpha Kingdom. That woman had disappeared years ago. Far away, in his palace, Damien often paused before an old portrait hanging above the fireplace. He wondered where Elena was, whether she had found happiness, whether someone, somewhere, had finally listened when she spoke. Neither of them knew it yet, but the Continental Alliance had just scheduled a summit unlike any before. For the first time in 8 years, the Alpha King and the woman who had left without a trace would stand beneath the same roof again. 8 years had changed everything, and nothing. The Continental Alliance Summit gathered the greatest rulers, scholars, military leaders, and diplomats beneath one roof. Unlike ordinary political meetings, this summit had only one purpose: to prevent wars before they began. The Grand Assembly Hall shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Representatives from every kingdom filled the seats. At the center sat Alpha King Damien Ashford. His hair now carried faint streaks of silver. The confidence that had once bordered on certainty had become careful restraint. He no longer interrupted his advisors. He no longer dismissed reports without reading them. Every document placed before him was reviewed personally. Every accusation, no matter how unlikely, received an investigation. The kingdom often praised him as the wisest ruler of his generation. Only Damien knew the truth. Wisdom had arrived 8 years too late. The master of ceremonies struck his staff against the marble floor. The Continental Alliance welcomes our keynote advisor, Dr. Elena Rowan. The hall erupted into respectful applause. Damien looked toward the entrance. Then, his world stopped. A woman dressed in a simple navy blue academic robe walked calmly to the stage. No crown, no jewels, no royal escort. Yet every ruler in the room instinctively rose to greet her. She moved with quiet confidence. The confidence of someone who no longer needed titles to prove her worth. Damien recognized her immediately. Elena, older, stronger. The sadness that had once shadowed her eyes had disappeared. Peace had taken its place. She glanced toward the audience. Their eyes met, only for a heartbeat. No anger, no surprise. Only quiet recognition. Then she continued walking, as though nothing had happened. Somehow, that hurt more than hatred would have. The chairman welcomed her warmly. Many of today's anti-corruption systems exist because of Dr. Rowan's research. Several rulers nodded. One king whispered to another, "She prevented a civil war in the Eastern Coalition." Another added, "Her mediation ended the river border crisis." A queen smiled. "My people owe her more than they'll ever know." Damien listened in stunned silence. 8 years ago, he had failed to hear the woman standing before him. Now, the entire continent listened whenever she spoke. Elena stepped behind the podium. She opened a single notebook, then began. "The greatest danger to any kingdom is rarely the enemy outside its borders." The hall became perfectly still. It is the moment honest voices stop believing they will be heard. Damien's chest tightened. Every word felt painfully familiar. Corruption survives for only one reason. Someone ignores the first warning. She paused. History proves that disasters almost never arrive without announcing themselves. They whisper first. The tragedy is how often leaders are too busy to listen. No one moved. No one even reached for a pen. The silence itself became proof of the respect she commanded. When the lecture ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Even kings applauded. Damien remained standing long after everyone else sat down. The session ended. Delegates slowly left the hall discussing Elena's presentation. She gathered her notebook quietly. Before she reached the exit, a familiar voice stopped her. "Elena." She turned. For the first time in 8 years, they stood face to face. Neither spoke. There were too many years between them. Too many words left unsaid. Finally, Damien managed a quiet smile. "You look happy." She returned the smile. "I am." Neither accusation nor forgiveness, just truth. After another long silence, Damien asked the question he had rehearsed in his mind for nearly a decade. Would you walk with me? Elena looked toward the palace gardens, beyond the tall windows, then back at the man who had once answered every urgent plea with one careless word. Tomorrow. This time, she nodded. All right. Because there was one conversation they had both carried for 8 long years, and tomorrow was no longer an answer. The palace gardens had not changed. White roses still climbed the stone arches. The fountain still sang its quiet song. Autumn leaves drifted across the winding paths, exactly as they had years ago. Only the two people walking beneath them were different. For several minutes, neither Damien nor Elena spoke. There was nothing awkward about the silence. It simply carried 8 years of unfinished conversation. Finally, Damien stopped beside the fountain. I searched for you. Elena looked at the water instead of him. I know. I searched every kingdom. I know. I visited every healer's sanctuary. I know. His voice grew quieter. I never stopped. She nodded gently. I know. He looked at her with tired eyes. Then why? It was only one word, yet it held every sleepless night, every unanswered question, every mile he had traveled hoping to find her. Elena turned toward him. You'll have to be more specific. He managed a sad smile. Why didn't you leave me a letter? The question hung between them. She studied him for a long moment, then asked softly, would you have believed the letter when you wouldn't even read the evidence already in your hands? Damien's breath caught. He opened his mouth, closed it again, because there was no answer, only truth. Finally, he whispered, no. She nodded once. That's why. He lowered his head. I kept wondering what I had done that was so unforgivable. Elena's expression softened. It wasn't one thing. It was years. He looked up. I don't understand. You didn't stop loving me. She spoke without bitterness. You stopped listening to me. Every word landed gently, which somehow made them hurt more. I brought you concerns. You postponed them. I brought you proof. You postponed that too. She smiled sadly. Eventually, I realized I had started rehearsing conversations before I entered a room. He frowned. Why? Because I was trying to predict which parts you would dismiss. Silence. I began collecting more evidence than I actually needed. Not because the evidence was weak, but because I believed my voice alone wasn't enough anymore. Damien closed his eyes. He remembered it now. The late nights, the careful notes, the endless folders. He had mistaken her thoroughness for suspicion. He never realized it had become survival. She continued quietly. The night I left, I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. Exhausted. Not furious, not hateful. Simply tired. Tired of proving I wasn't imagining things. Tired of wondering whether tomorrow would ever come. Tired of feeling that strangers' reports reached your heart faster than my words. A tear slipped down Damien's face. I'm sorry. She smiled with quiet kindness. I know. I mean it. I know. I'd do anything to change that night. I know. The repetition broke him. He laughed bitterly through tears. You've forgiven me. Yes. But you can't come back. She looked at him with gentle honesty. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I could no longer survive being unheard. The words settled over the garden like falling leaves. Damien finally understood. She had not disappeared to punish him. She had disappeared because staying would have slowly erased the person she was. He took a slow breath. I won't ask you to return. She looked surprised. I have no right. He smiled sadly. But I do have one responsibility. What is that? To make sure no one else in my kingdom ever has to leave for the same reason. For the first time that afternoon, Elena's smile reached her eyes. Then perhaps We didn't lose everything after all. As the sun dipped below the palace walls, they walked back toward the summit, not as husband and wife, not as strangers, but as two people who had finally finished the conversation that should have happened 8 years earlier. And for Damien, it was the first time he truly understood that listening was not simply hearing someone's words. It was believing their heart before it broke. Damien returned home alone. He did not ask Elena to come with him. He did not send flowers. He did not write letters begging for another chance. Love, he finally understood, could not be rebuilt by asking someone to return to the place where they had slowly disappeared. It had to begin somewhere else, with himself. The morning after he returned, he summoned the royal council, every minister, every general, every village representative, every guild leader. The great council chamber had never been so full. The ministers expected news from the Continental Alliance. Instead, Damien placed a single worn leather folder on the council table, Elena's folder, the same one he had refused to open 8 years earlier. He rested his hand upon it. This kingdom almost fell because I ignored this. The chamber grew silent. I trusted the wrong man. But that wasn't my greatest mistake. He looked around the room. My greatest mistake was believing I could postpone listening to the person who loved this kingdom most. No one spoke. Because no one could deny it, he continued. Today, that ends. Over the following months, the kingdom witnessed reforms unlike any in its history. Anonymous reporting offices opened in every province. Any citizen could submit evidence of corruption directly to the throne without fear of punishment. Military audits became mandatory every season. No advisor, minister, or royal official, regardless of rank, was exempt from investigation. Royal meetings could no longer dismiss concerns with a simple verbal refusal. Every report had to receive a written response. Every accusation had to be documented. Every investigation had to leave a paper trail. The chancellor smiled the day she signed the final decree. You've changed the way the kingdom listens. Damien quietly shook his head. No, I've finally learned how. Then came the reform that surprised everyone. Damien personally drafted it. He titled it, The Luna's Hearing. The law required that any concern brought before the throne, whether by the queen, a minister, a guard, or an ordinary citizen, could never again be dismissed without formal review. Evidence had to be examined, witnesses had to be interviewed, findings had to be recorded. The law carried only one sentence beneath its title. No voice shall be ignored because of familiarity, affection, rank, or assumption. When the law was announced, a young court advisor raised his hand. Your Majesty, why call it the Luna's Hearing? Damien looked toward the empty seat that had once belonged to Elena. Because I once believed I had time to listen tomorrow. His voice remained steady. I was wrong. The advisor lowered his head. Years passed. The reforms transformed the kingdom. Corruption fell dramatically. Village leaders trusted the crown again. Foreign allies renewed trade agreements. Scholars from neighboring nations traveled to study the kingdom's system of public accountability. Many praised Damien as a visionary. He always corrected them. I wasn't visionary. I was taught. By whom? He smiled sadly. By the woman I failed to hear. One spring afternoon, Damien visited a village school. A young girl stood and asked an innocent question. Your Majesty, what makes a good king? The classroom fell silent. Damien thought for a long moment before answering. A good king knows that wisdom isn't measured by how often he speaks. He smiled gently. It's measured by how carefully he listens. The children wrote the sentence into their notebooks. None of them knew. Those words had cost one king the greatest love of his life to learn. Far away, across the sea, Elena's academy continued welcoming students from every kingdom. Neither she nor Damien ever returned to the life they had once shared. Yet each, in their own way, continued shaping a better future from the lessons of a painful past. And soon, those two paths would quietly cross one final time. 10 years after Queen Elena Winterbourne disappeared, people no longer searched for her. They searched for Dr. Elena Rowan. Her academy stood on a quiet hill overlooking the sea. There were no statues of kings, no marble throne, no royal banners fluttering above its gates. Only students, hundreds of them, future rulers, judges, military officers, physicians, village leaders. They came from every corner of the continent for one reason: to learn how to prevent disasters before they happened. Above the academy entrance, carved into white stone, were the words every student memorized before attending their first lesson. Being unheard long enough eventually sounds exactly like being unloved. Each morning, Elena walked through the courtyard, greeting students by name. She knew who struggled with diplomacy, who excelled at strategy, who secretly doubted themselves. Titles had never impressed her. People did. Inside the largest lecture hall, she addressed a new class of future rulers. She held up two identical folders. One was empty, the other was filled with papers. "If I hand these to a king," she asked, "which one matters more?" A prince answered confidently, "The one with evidence." Elena smiled. "Wrong." The room fell silent. "They matter equally." The students exchanged puzzled looks. The empty folder represents trust. The full folder represents proof. She placed both on the desk. A wise leader never forces someone who has earned their trust to prove every word they speak. The prince slowly lowered his eyes. "I understand." "No." Elena smiled kindly. "You will. When life gives you someone whose honesty has already been tested by time." Far away, Damien stepped through the academy gates. He wore no royal cloak, no jeweled crown, only a simple dark coat. He had come alone. No announcement had been made. No ceremony had been requested. He wished only to see the place that had become Elena's true legacy. A young student noticed the unfamiliar visitor. "Sir, I'm looking around. Are you thinking of enrolling?" Damien laughed quietly. "I believe I'm a little old." The student smiled. "We have students in their 70s. Learning doesn't retire." Damien looked around the lively campus. Groups debated ethics beneath oak trees. Future diplomats practiced negotiations in the gardens. Medical students treated villagers free of charge in the academy clinic. It didn't feel like a school. It felt like hope. He wandered into the library. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. At the center stood a display case containing a single worn leather folder. A small plaque beneath it read, "The first lesson, never postpone the truth because it is inconvenient." Damien stood frozen. He recognized the folder immediately, not because it was the original, but because it represented the one he had refused to open. A librarian approached. "Many visitors ask about that display. What do you tell them?" She smiled. "That one unread folder changed the way an entire continent teaches leadership." Damien lowered his eyes. "I believe it did." As he turned to leave, he noticed Elena standing across the courtyard, speaking with several students. She hadn't seen him. Or perhaps she had. She laughed at something a young girl said. The sound carried gently through the afternoon air. It was the first carefree laugh he had ever heard from her. He smiled, then quietly walked away. He did not interrupt. Some stories no longer needed another conversation. Some endings were already complete. And as the academy bells rang across the hill, Damien realized that Elena had never needed to reclaim her crown. She had built something far greater, a place where every future leader would learn the lesson he had learned too late. 20 years after Queen Elena Winterbourne vanished from the Alpha Kingdom. No one remembered the scandal. No one whispered about the Luna who had disappeared before dawn. History had chosen to remember something else. It remembered the woman who changed how kingdoms listened. Every year, the Continental Alliance hosted the leadership convocation at Elena Rowan Academy. Future kings, queens, judges, generals, village elders, and young students from every nation gathered beneath one roof. Their final lecture was always the same. Not on military strategy, not on diplomacy, on listening. An elderly Dr. Elena Rowan stood before the graduating class. Time had silvered her hair. It had not diminished the quiet strength in her voice. She held up an ordinary leather folder. It weighs less than a kilogram. The students smiled. They all knew the lesson. But years ago, it weighed more than an entire kingdom. Silence settled over the hall. Because no one measured its weight by paper. They measured it by the cost of ignoring it. She set the folder on the lectern. If someone who has earned your trust asks you to listen, don't answer with tomorrow. The students wrote every word, not because they feared examinations, because they knew they were listening to a woman whose wisdom had already saved countless lives. When the lecture ended, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them stood an elderly Alpha King Damien Ashford. His reign was nearing its end. His shoulders had grown slightly stooped with age. But his eyes remained attentive. He applauded longer than anyone else. After the ceremony, a young prince approached him. "Your Majesty, were you one of Dr. Rowan's students?" Damien smiled sadly. In a way, the prince looked curious. What was the most important thing she ever taught you? Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered, "That hearing someone's words is not the same as listening to their heart." The young prince frowned thoughtfully. "I don't think I understand." "You will." Damien looked toward Elena as she spoke with a group of graduates beneath the Academy's old oak tree. "And when that day comes, I hope you understand it before it costs you someone you love." The prince bowed respectfully. "I'll remember that." As evening settled over the Academy grounds, Elena walked alone through the gardens she had planted decades earlier. Rows of white lilies swayed gently in the breeze. She paused before the stone inscription at the entrance. The words had faded slightly with time, never in meaning. Being unheard long enough eventually sounds exactly like being unloved. Footsteps approached quietly behind her. She turned. Damien stood several paces away. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, he smiled. "I came to say goodbye." She nodded gently. "I thought you might. The kingdom no longer needs me. It will always need what you've taught it." He looked around the academy. "Thank you." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For refusing to let your pain become your purpose." He smiled through tired eyes. "You turned it into wisdom instead." Elena's eyes softened. "So did you." He laughed quietly. "It only took me half a lifetime." Before leaving, Damien looked once more at the academy, at the students laughing together, at the physicians treating strangers, at the future rulers discussing justice instead of conquest. Then he bowed, not to a queen, not to a former wife, but to the woman whose voice had changed the course of his life. After he disappeared beyond the gates, Elena looked toward the horizon. She felt no sorrow, only peace. Because she had learned the lesson that would outlive every crown. Being truly heard is one of the deepest forms of love, and sometimes, the greatest legacy a person leaves behind is not a throne, but a generation that will never repeat the mistake that once broke their heart.